Story 1. The Rest Stop That Resets. Michael Torres had been trucking for 17 years, hauling everything from refrigerated produce to construction equipment across the lower 48 states. He knew every major highway, every reliable fuel stop, and every rest area worth using. His freight liner Cascadia was equipped with all the modern conveniences: adaptive cruise control, lane departure warning, and a sleeper cab comfortable enough that he rarely bothered with motels. In January of 2024, Michael was running a load of electronics from Dallas to Kansas City, a straightforward overnight haul along Interstate 40 and Interstate 35 that he'd completed dozens of times without incident. He departed Dallas at 6 p.m., planning to drive through the night and arrive in Kansas City by mid-morning. The first few hours passed uneventfully as he crossed into Oklahoma, the landscape transitioning from rolling hills to flatter plains. Traffic was light, mostly other commercial vehicles making similar overnight runs. Around 2 a.m., fatigue began setting in, not unusual for this time of night. Michael had been driving for 8 hours and needed a mandatory break. He took the exit for a rest area he'd used many times before, a standard Oklahoma DOT facility with restrooms, vending machines, and parking for about 20 trucks. The rest stop appeared deserted when he pulled in, his headlights sweeping across empty parking spaces. Only one other truck was present, a Peterbilt with its lights off, parked at the far end of the lot. Michael chose a spot near the building, set his air brakes, and checked his watch. 2:07 a.m. He'd take a 30-minute break, use the facilities, grab some coffee from the vending machine, and get back on the road. The building was typically institutional: cinder block construction, fluorescent lighting, tile floors worn from years of foot traffic. The lights were on but flickering slightly, creating an irregular strobe effect that made Michael's eyes hurt. He used the restroom, washed his face to wake himself up, and approached the vending machines in the main corridor. The coffee machine was old but functional, and he fed it dollar bills, selecting black coffee, no sugar. As the machine dispensed his drink, Michael noticed something odd about the silence. Rest stops were never completely quiet. There was always ambient sound, air conditioning hum, distant traffic noise, something. But this building was absolutely silent except for the vending machine's mechanical grinding. Even the fluorescent lights, which should have been buzzing, made no sound despite their visible flickering. Michael took his coffee and returned to his truck, the styrofoam cup warm in his hands. He climbed into the cab, settled into his seat, and checked his watch again. 2:17 a.m. Exactly 10 minutes had passed, which matched his perception of time. He sipped the coffee, entered his break time into his electronic logging device, and prepared to depart in 20 minutes. Then he saw movement near the building entrance. A figure was walking toward the doors, a man in trucker gear moving with a familiar gait. As the figure passed under the security light, Michael's blood went cold. The man was him. Same height, same build, same jacket, same everything. Michael watched his duplicate enter the rest stop building, disappearing through the doors he'd just exited moments ago. Michael sat frozen, coffee cup halfway to his lips, mind struggling to process what he'd witnessed. Fatigue hallucination, he thought. He'd been driving too long, his brain was playing tricks. He rubbed his eyes hard, looked again at the building entrance. Nothing. No one there. He laughed nervously, took another sip of coffee, tried to rationalize the experience. But then, 10 minutes later, the duplicate emerged. Michael watched himself walk out of the building carrying a styrofoam cup, moving in exactly the same way he'd moved, with exactly the same posture and stride. The duplicate walked toward Michael's truck, walked directly toward where Michael sat watching in horror, and kept coming right up to the driver's side door. Michael's hand was on the door handle, ready to lock it, ready to confront this impossible doppelganger. But the duplicate didn't try to open the door. Instead, it walked through the door, through the physical barrier as if it were smoke, and merged with Michael's position. For a fraction of a second, Michael felt doubled, as if he existed in two places simultaneously. The sensation was like ice water flooding through his body, a cold that went beyond physical temperature into something existential and wrong. Then nothing. Michael blinked, and he was standing inside the rest stop building, approaching the vending machines with no memory of having left his truck. His hands reached for his wallet automatically, pulling out dollar bills. He fed them into the coffee machine, selected black coffee, no sugar, exactly as he'd done before, or as he remembered doing before, or as he was doing now. Time felt fluid, uncertain. The coffee dispensed, and Michael grabbed the cup, but this time he forced himself to stay aware, to remember what had happened. He'd already done this. He'd seen his duplicate. He was caught in some kind of loop. He checked his watch, 2:17 a.m., the same time as before. Michael ran out of the building, not walking, running, desperate to break the pattern. He climbed into his truck, started the engine immediately, released the brakes, and pulled out of the parking lot without completing his break. He accelerated onto the highway entrance ramp, merging back onto Interstate 40, determined to escape whatever temporal anomaly had trapped him. The highway stretched ahead, dark and empty. Michael drove for what felt like several minutes, putting distance between himself and the rest. Stop. He checked his odometer, 3.2 miles from the exit. Safe. He'd escaped. He exhaled slowly, hands shaking on the steering wheel. Then his headlights illuminated a green highway sign. Rest area, 1 mile. Michael's heart stuttered. That was impossible. He'd just left the rest area, had driven away from it. But the sign was there, and as he continued, more signs appeared. Rest area 1/2 mile, then rest area next exit. He tried to drive past, tried to ignore the exit, but his truck began slowing on its own, his foot pressure on the accelerator making no difference. The steering wheel turned without his input, guiding the truck onto the exit ramp. Michael fought it, pulling hard on the wheel, but the truck was operating independently now, following a predetermined path. The rest stop appeared ahead, exactly as it had been, or as it would be, or as it always was. Michael's truck parked itself in the same spot he'd chosen before. The engine shut off. His watch showed 2:07 a.m. He was back at the beginning. Michael tried to stay in the truck this time, tried to refuse participation in the loop. He sat rigid in his seat, hands gripping the wheel, staring straight ahead. But after a subjective minute, he blinked, and he was walking into the rest stop building, his body moving without conscious direction, following the script of actions he'd already performed. He bought coffee from the vending machine. He returned to his truck. He waited 10 minutes, and then he saw himself walking into the building, beginning another iteration. When the duplicate emerged and merged with him, the cold flooded through his body again, and he reset, standing once more inside the building, approaching the vending machines, trapped in 10 minutes that repeated eternally. Michael tried everything to escape. He tried staying in his truck and refusing to enter the building. His body walked there anyway, consciousness following after, discovering himself mid-action. He tried driving away before the 10-minute cycle completed. The highway always looped him back. He tried smashing the vending machine, disrupting the routine. His hands wouldn't obey, his body completing the purchase despite his mental resistance. Worst of all, he began to notice details that suggested he wasn't alone in the loop. The other truck, the Peterbilt at the far end of the lot, sometimes had its lights on, sometimes off. Sometimes it was a Peterbilt, sometimes a Kenworth, sometimes a Volvo. The model and color changed between iterations, but it was always there, always parked in the same location, always dark and unoccupied, or seemingly unoccupied. During one iteration, Michael forced himself to walk to that truck instead of returning to his own. The effort was immense, like moving through water, his body resisting every step away from the programmed routine. But he reached the truck and looked inside. The cab was empty, but the driver's seat was still warm, and on the dashboard was a logbook, open to a page filled with the same entry written over and over. Arrived, rest stop 2:07 a.m., departed 2:37 a.m. Arrived, rest stop 2:07 a.m., departed 2:37 a.m. The handwriting degraded as the entries continued, becoming frantic scrawls, eventually dissolving into illegible scratches. Michael returned to his own truck, or found himself there, the transition between locations becoming blurry, and checked his own logbook. It showed the same repeating entry in his handwriting, pages and pages of arrived, rest stop 2:07 a.m., each one written during an iteration he barely remembered. He began to fragment. The constant resetting eroded his sense of continuity. Sometimes he was aware of the loop, recognizing that he'd done this before, fighting against the predestined actions. Other times he moved through the routine with no awareness, his consciousness suppressed, experiencing the 10 minutes as if for the first time. And occasionally he became aware mid-loop, snapping into consciousness while already performing an action, buying coffee, walking to his truck, checking his watch, with no memory of how he'd gotten there. The worst iterations were when he could see other versions of himself operating simultaneously. He'd be walking into the building and see himself walking out, or he'd be in his truck and see himself standing by the vending machine visible through the building's windows, or he'd be checking his watch and see his own reflection showing a different time than what his watch displayed. The loop was spawning multiple instances of the same 10 minutes, and Michael existed in all of them simultaneously. His consciousness spread across temporal iterations like butter scraped over too much bread. Other figures began appearing, not duplicates of Michael, but other truckers walking through the rest stop, buying coffee, returning to trucks that materialized and vanished. They were ghosts or memories or other people trapped in their own loops, occupying the same space but different temporal positions. Sometimes they'd look directly at Michael, their eyes pleading, their mouths forming words he couldn't hear. One man, wearing a trucker cap and a jacket from a company that had gone bankrupt in the 1990s, kept trying to approach Michael, reaching out with desperate hands that passed through Michael's body like smoke. Michael tried to communicate with them, tried to coordinate an escape, but the temporal displacement made interaction impossible. They existed in parallel loops, close enough to perceive each other but unable to truly connect, like radio stations bleeding into each other, creating static and interference without clear transmission. His watch still showed 2:17 a.m. during each check, but Michael began to suspect that real time was passing outside the loop. His beard grew between iterations. Not much, barely, noticeable, but present. His coffee, which should have stayed hot within the loop's 10 minutes, was cold when he checked it during moments of awareness. And his truck's fuel gauge was slowly dropping, the engine running through iteration after iteration, burning diesel that existed outside the loop's temporal boundary. Eventually, Michael stopped fighting. The exhaustion was too great, the repetition too perfect. He surrendered to the routine, let his body walk through the motions while his mind retreated to some protected space where the constant resetting couldn't reach. He existed in a fugue state, barely aware, occasionally surfacing to recognition before being pulled back under. The rest stop still operates. Truckers use it regularly, park in its lot, use its facilities, buy coffee from its vending machines, and leave without incident. But sometimes drivers report seeing a Freightliner Cascadia parked near the building with its engine running, lights on, appearing abandoned. When authorities check, they find the truck registered to Michael Torres, reported missing in January 2024 after his last known position placed him at this rest area. The truck is empty when they look, But if they wait, if they watch carefully, they'll see a figure walking into the building at 2:07 a.m., buying coffee, returning to the truck 10 minutes later. If they approach during those 10 minutes, the figure vanishes. If they check the logbook, they'll find pages filled with the same entry repeated hundreds of times. Michael Torres is still there, trapped in 10 minutes, that cycle endlessly. Walking into a rest stop building that exists in all times and no time. Buying coffee he'll never finish drinking. Returning to a truck he'll never truly drive away. Living the same brief segment of his life in perpetual repetition. Occasionally becoming aware enough to realize his situation before the next reset wipes his memory and forces him to experience it again. An eternal present with no past to remember and no future to anticipate. Just 10 minutes that contain his entire existence, forever looping, forever 2:07 a.m., forever arriving at a rest stop he can never leave. Story 2. The mile marker that counts backward. Sharon Kemp had driven for 19 years, specializing in long-distance refrigerated hauls across the western states. She knew Highway 93 through Nevada better than most, having run loads between Las Vegas and Twin Falls countless times. In March of 2023, she was hauling frozen foods north from Las Vegas, her Volvo VNL pulling a reefer trailer set to -10 degrees Fahrenheit. The weather was clear, traffic minimal, conditions ideal for making good time. Around midnight, Sharon was approaching the section of Highway 93 that ran through empty desert, a stretch where towns were separated by 70 or 80 miles, where cell service was non-existent, where the only lights were stars and occasional passing vehicles. She was listening to a podcast, sipping coffee from her thermos, maintaining a steady 65 miles per hour, when she noticed something odd about the mile markers. Mile markers were Sharon's constant companions on long hauls, the numbered posts that measured progress along highways, counting upward as drivers traveled forward. On this stretch, she should have been passing markers counting from the low 200s toward the mid-200s. She just passed mile marker 215, noted it unconsciously as part of her habitual awareness of position and progress. But the next marker she saw read 214. Sharon frowned, glanced in her mirror, wondering if she'd misread the previous marker. But no, she clearly remembered 215. Yet here was 214, and then 213, and then 212. The mile markers were counting backward, descending in number as she drove forward. Sharon checked her GPS. It showed her moving north along Highway 93 at normal speed, her position advancing as expected. Her odometer was ticking upward, confirming she was covering distance. But the mile markers continued their backward count. 211, 210, 209. She was moving forward while the road's measurement system insisted she was moving backward. She tried her CB radio. Anyone out there on 93, this is Sharon Kemp, northbound. Seeing some weird mile marker readings. Anybody else notice anything strange? Static was the only answer. She tried her cell phone. No signal, as expected in this remote area. The mile markers continued their reverse progression. Sharon drove for 30 minutes, covering roughly 30 miles according to her odometer and GPS. But the markers descended from 215 down to 185. The mathematics were impossible. She was covering distance forward while the markers counted the same distance backward, as if space itself was contradicting itself. Then she saw lights ahead. Another vehicle approaching from the opposite direction. Sharon flashed her lights in greeting, and as the truck passed, she saw it was identical to her own. Same model Volvo, same blue paint, same company logo. She glimpsed the driver briefly, a woman who looked startlingly familiar, but the truck was passed before Sharon could process what she'd seen. Mile marker 180 appeared in her headlights, then 179, 178. Sharon's unease deepened. She'd driven this route dozens of times and knew there was nothing notable between mile markers 215 and 160, just empty desert, no exits, no services. But if the markers continued counting backward, what would happen when she reached 0? Would the markers go negative or would something else occur? She decided to turn around to return to the last town and report the malfunction. But when she began looking for a place to execute a U-turn on the divided highway, she realized there was no median, no turnaround, no crossover points visible. The highway was a single continuous ribbon of pavement with no breaks, no exits, nothing but the endless white lines and descending mile markers. The fuel gauge caught her attention. It was dropping faster than it should, the needle sinking visibly as she watched. She'd fueled up in Las Vegas, should have had 3/4 of a tank, but the gauge showed less than half and falling. Sharon's throat tightened. Something was consuming fuel faster than the engine's normal rate, as if the impossible geography was demanding a higher price for travel. Mile marker 150 passed, then 149. The podcast she'd been listening to ended, and the next episode began. But it was the same episode she'd just heard, playing from the beginning. Sharon stopped it, tried selecting a different podcast, but when she played it, the same episode came through her speakers. She tried the radio, scanning through frequencies, finding only static or that same podcast episode, her own voice somehow part of the recording commenting on mile markers counting backward. At mile marker 125, Sharon saw a truck stopped on the shoulder ahead, its hazard lights flashing. She slowed, pulling alongside, and recognition hit her like a physical blow. It was her truck, exact duplicate, same license plate, same company number on the door. And standing beside it was Sharon herself, waving desperately for help. Sharon stopped, her mind rejecting what her eyes reported. The other Sharon ran to her window, shouting, but no sound penetrated the glass. Sharon could see her duplicate's mouth moving, see the panic in her eyes, her own eyes, but heard nothing. She tried opening the window, but it wouldn't respond. The duplicate pounded on the glass, leaving no mark, no sound, as if she was incorporeal. Then Sharon noticed the mile marker beside the stopped truck. 0. The duplicate Sharon was stranded at mile marker 0, and the real Sharon, if she was the real one, was at mile marker 125 and descending. She accelerated, leaving her duplicate behind, watching in the mirror as the other Sharon collapsed to her knees on the empty highway shoulder, hands covering her face in despair. The markers descended through the hundreds and into double digits. At mile marker 99, Sharon saw another stopped truck, another duplicate of herself standing beside it. At mile marker 73, another. At mile marker 47, another. Each duplicate seemed more worn, more desperate, more deteriorated, as if they'd been trapped at their respective mile markers for increasing lengths of time. Sharon understood with horrible clarity she was seeing her own future. Each stopped duplicate was a version of herself that had run out of fuel or will at that mile marker, trapped forever at a single point while new iterations of Sharon continued the backward journey, each one eventually stopping. Each one adding to the collection of failed Sharons lining the impossible highway. Mile marker 25 passed. Sharon's fuel gauge was approaching empty despite the impossibility. She should have hundreds of miles of range remaining. But the backward counting highway was draining her resources at an accelerated rate. She tried to calculate when she'd run out. Maybe at mile marker 15, maybe 10. She'd become another stopped duplicate, standing in the desert dark, watching future versions of herself drive past toward the same inevitable fate. At mile marker 11, her engine coughed, the first sign of fuel starvation. Sharon's hands tightened on the wheel. She wasn't ready to stop, wasn't ready to become one of the trapped duplicates. She pushed the accelerator harder as if willpower could extend her remaining fuel. Mile marker 7 appeared and Sharon made a desperate decision. If the highway counted backward, maybe she needed to drive backward to reverse direction, not by turning around, but by reversing the fundamental direction of travel. She shifted into reverse, pressed the accelerator, and the truck began moving backward. But according to the mile markers, she was now traveling forward. Mile marker 8 appeared behind her as she reversed toward it, then 9, then 10. It was working. Driving backward made her go forward through the mile marker sequence. But the speed was limited, the truck's transmission not designed for sustained high-speed reverse travel. She was moving at maybe 20 miles per hour, the engine screaming in protest while her fuel gauge continued dropping. Mile marker 25, 30, 40. Sharon reversed along the highway, passing the duplicate versions of herself that she'd seen on her forward journey. They watched her pass, their expressions shifting from despair to confusion to something like hope. One of them tried to flag her down, running after her reversed truck, but Sharon couldn't stop, couldn't risk losing momentum. Mile marker 100 passed, and Sharon's fuel gauge touched empty. The engine died. The truck coasted to a stop on the shoulder at mile marker 107. Sharon sat in the sudden silence, hands still on the wheel, breath coming fast. She traveled backward from mile marker 7 to 107, 100 miles in reverse, but it hadn't been enough. The highway still counted backward ahead of her, descending toward mile marker 215 where she'd first noticed the anomaly. But she had no fuel left to reach it. She climbed out of the cab and stood on the empty highway. The night was absolutely silent, no wind, no insects, nothing but her own breathing. In the distance, headlights approached, another truck moving forward, descending through the mile markers. Sharon tried to wave it down, tried to signal for help, but the truck passed without slowing, the driver apparently not seeing her. As it passed, she glimpsed the driver's face. It was herself. A new iteration beginning the journey that would trap her somewhere along this impossible road. Sharon doesn't know how long she's been standing at mile marker 107. Time doesn't seem to progress normally here. Sometimes it feels like minutes, sometimes like years. She's watched dozens of trucks pass, some of them driven by versions of herself, others by different truckers, all of them descending through the backward-counting mile markers. All of them eventually stopping, running out of fuel, adding to the collection of trapped drivers lining the highway. She's tried walking, but movement seems impossible. Her feet go through the motions, but her position relative to mile marker 107 never changes. She's tried sleeping, but sleep doesn't come. Just a state of reduced awareness that snaps back to full consciousness with no sense of time having passed. She exists in a perpetual present, frozen at a single point on a highway that measures distance in reverse, watching the same scene repeat, trucks approaching, passing her mile marker, descending toward their own stopping points, adding to the infinite collection of stranded travelers trapped in the geography that makes no sense. Where forward is backward, where distance is meaningless, where Highway 93 counts down toward zero and beyond into negative numbers, into impossible space, into the void where Sharon Kemp and countless other drivers stand motionless, eternal witnesses to a road that forgot how to end. Story 3. The Voice on Channel 19. Raymond Booker had been driving for 25 years, longer than many of the younger truckers had been alive. He was old school, preferred CB radio to cell phones, maintained his own truck, and knew the trucking culture inside and out. His handle was Nighthawk, and he was a familiar voice on Channel 19, always ready to help a fellow driver with directions, road conditions, or just conversation during long, lonely nights. In February of 2024, Raymond was hauling furniture from North Carolina to Phoenix, running Interstate 40 through Tennessee when his CB radio began picking up a voice he'd never forget. It started around 10 p.m. as Raymond crossed into Arkansas. He was monitoring Channel 19 as always, listening to the usual chatter, drivers discussing traffic, sharing locations of police speed traps, complaining about dispatchers. Then a new voice cut through, male, with an accent Raymond couldn't quite place, speaking slowly and deliberately. "Can anyone hear me? I need help. I don't know where I am." Raymond keyed his microphone. "This is Nighthawk, I copy you. What's your 20? Trucker slang for location. "I don't know. Everything looks the same. I've been driving for hours, maybe days. The highway just continues, never ends." "Can you help? Me?" "Sure, friend. What highway are you on? What's the last mile marker or exit you passed?" "There are no mile markers, no exits. Just highway and darkness. Please, I need someone to talk to. I've been alone so long." Raymond frowned. The voice sounded genuine, desperate but controlled, not like someone pranking the channel. "What's your name, driver?" "Edward. Edward Simmons. I'm driving a Freightliner Classic. I was hauling steel coils from Chicago to Dallas. But something happened. The road changed. Now I can't find my way back." "Edward, stay calm. How long ago did this happen?" A long pause. "I don't know. My watch stopped working, my phone won't turn on, my GPS is frozen. I've been trying to reach someone on the CB for what feels like forever, but until now, no one responded." Raymond checked his own equipment, everything functioning normally. "Edward, I'm reading you clear. Where did you last have service? What was your last confirmed position?" "Oklahoma. I was on 40 near Oklahoma City. Then there was fog, really thick fog, and when I came out the other side, everything was different. Wrong. The highway looks the same but feels wrong. And there's no one else, no other vehicles, no lights except my own headlights. Just empty highway forever." Raymond's skin prickled. He knew Oklahoma, knew Interstate 40 through that section. Fog was uncommon but not impossible. But what Edward described, total isolation, no other traffic, frozen equipment, that was beyond normal experience. "Edward, I'm in Arkansas right now, also on 40. I'm eastbound. What direction are you traveling?" "West. I've been heading west because that's the direction I was going, toward Dallas. But I haven't reached Dallas, haven't reached anywhere. It's just highway and darkness and—" The voice broke, emotion finally cracking through. "And I'm scared I'm going to run out of fuel out here and no one will ever find me." "You won't run out, Edward. I'm here. We'll figure this out together. How's your fuel level?" "3/4 full, but it should be empty by now. I've driven hundreds of miles, but the gauge hasn't moved. Nothing makes sense." Raymond thought quickly. Edward's situation sounded like temporal or spatial displacement, the kind of thing he'd heard whispered about among old-timers but never witnessed personally. Stories about drivers who disappeared, about highways that led to nowhere, about zones where normal rules didn't apply. He'd always dismissed them as urban legends, cautionary tales for rookies. But here was Edward, a voice on Channel 19 claiming to be trapped in exactly that kind of situation. "Edward, listen carefully. I'm going to stay on the radio with you. We're going to talk through this. You're not alone anymore. First, I want you to describe exactly what you see around you." "Darkness. My headlights show pavement. White lines, empty highway. Beyond the headlights, nothing. Pure black, like the light just stops at a certain point. No stars, no moon, no ambient light at all. It's like I'm driving through a void with just this small bubble of road visible. Any structures, signs, landmarks?" "Nothing. Wait, there's something ahead. A sign. Oh God, finally. Maybe it'll tell me where I am." A pause. It says, "Welcome to Oklahoma City, 50 miles, but that's impossible. I've been driving away from Oklahoma City for hours." "How can I be approaching it?" Raymond's mind raced. "Edward, what if you turned around? What if you drove in the opposite direction?" "I tried that. Hours ago, the signs just reversed. It said Oklahoma City, 50 miles behind me too. No matter which direction I drive, it's always 50 miles away. Raymond pulled off at the next rest area, needing to focus entirely on this conversation. Other drivers were occasionally keying into the channel, asking what was going on, who Edward was, but Raymond told them to keep the channel clear. This was an emergency. Most complied, though a few muttered about drama queens and attention seekers. For the next hour, Raymond stayed on the radio with Edward, talking about everything and nothing. Families, favorite routes, memorable deliveries. Edward calmed somewhat, seemed grateful for the human contact. But as time passed, the conversation grew stranger. Edward began describing things that didn't match reality. Raymond, I see other trucks now. They're stopped on the shoulder, dozens of them, maybe hundreds, all just sitting there with their lights off. Should I stop? Should I check if anyone needs help? Edward, do you see drivers? Any people around those trucks? No, they look abandoned. But, Raymond, one of them is a Freightliner Classic, same model as mine, same company colors. It looks exactly like my truck. What does that mean? Raymond's throat went dry. Edward, don't stop. Keep driving. Don't approach those trucks. Why? What if someone needs help? Just trust me. Keep moving. But Edward's voice had changed, becoming distant, distracted. There's something else. I see lights in my mirror, headlights behind me. Another truck is following me, finally someone else. I'm not alone. Relief flooded his voice. I'm going to slow down, let them catch up, see if they know how to get out of here. Edward, no, don't let them catch you. Accelerate, get away from them. Why? You said I needed to find other people. Here they are. That's not people, Edward. That's something else. Trust me, drive faster. Too late. Edward's voice rose in panic. Oh God, Raymond, I can see the driver. It's me. The truck behind me, the driver is me. How is that possible? How? The transmission cut to static. Raymond keyed his mic desperately. Edward, respond, come back. Only static answered, and then silence. Raymond sat in his truck at the Arkansas rest area, hands shaking, CB microphone still pressed to his lips. Around him, other truckers were calling in, asking what happened, if Edward was okay, if this was real or some kind of radio play. Raymond tried calling back on Channel 19, tried other channels, spent the next hour attempting to re-establish contact. Nothing. Edward Simmons was gone. His voice vanished from the airwaves as suddenly as it had appeared. Raymond continued his haul to Phoenix, but the encounter haunted him. He researched Edward Simmons, trying to find any record of a trucker by that name driving a Freightliner Classic. He found one. Edward Simmons, age 42, reported missing in November of 2019 along Interstate 40 near Oklahoma City. His truck had never been found. The case remained unsolved. November 2019, more than 4 years before Raymond heard Edward's voice on the CB. But time displacement was possible in whatever zone Edward was trapped in. Maybe Edward had only just started calling for help from his perspective, despite years passing in normal time. Or maybe the voice Raymond heard was an echo, a recording somehow impressed into radio frequencies, replaying Edward's desperate final transmission on endless loop. Raymond never learned the truth, but he kept monitoring Channel 19, listening for Edward's voice, hoping to hear him again, hoping to somehow help him escape. Other drivers reported similar experiences, hearing distress calls from truckers later confirmed missing, hearing voices from drivers long dead, hearing conversations that shouldn't be possible. Channel 19 became something different to Raymond after that night. Not just a communication tool, but a haunted frequency, a place where the lost could still speak, where drivers trapped in impossible situations could send their voices out like messages in bottles, hoping someone in normal reality would hear them, would answer, would remember that they existed and were still out there somewhere, driving through darkness on highways that had no end. passing signs that promised destinations 50 miles away that could never be reached, watching other versions of themselves appear in mirrors and knowing that the highway was collecting them, adding them to its fleet of trapped drivers, and all they could do was keep transmitting, keep calling out on Channel 19, keep hoping that someone like Raymond would hear them and would refuse to forget, would keep listening, would bear witness that they lived and drove and became lost in the spaces between real roads, the phantom highways that existed in dimensions adjacent to ours where fuel never ran out because the journey never ended, where Oklahoma City was always 50 miles away, where every truck on the shoulder looked like your own, where the driver following behind wore your face, and where the only connection to reality was a voice on CB radio, fading in and out, calling for help that could never arrive, forever transmitting into the void, forever hoping for an answer. Story 4. The Way Station Outside Time. Christine Park had been driving for 13 years, primarily hauling agricultural equipment across the Midwest. She was meticulous about compliance, scales, logbooks, inspections, always stopping at way stations, always following regulations to the letter. In May of 2023, Christine was hauling a load of tractor parts from Nebraska to Minnesota along Interstate 90, approaching the Iowa border in late afternoon. Ahead, the familiar blue Way Station, all trucks must stop when open sign appeared, with the lights indicating the station was operational. Christine signaled and took the exit ramp, following the curve toward the Way Station. The facility looked standard, a long building with multiple lanes for trucks to pull onto scales, office windows where inspectors could observe, parking areas for detailed inspections. Christine pulled onto the scale in lane 2, waiting for the system to register her truck's weight and give her clearance to proceed. The digital display above her showed, "Wait for signal." Christine waited, engine idling, watching the office windows. Usually clearance came within 30 seconds to a minute, but she sat for 5 minutes with no change. The display still showed "Wait for signal." No inspector appeared in the windows. No other trucks were visible in the other lanes or parking areas. The facility seemed deserted. Christine's CB radio crackled. "Any trucks at the Iowa Way Station on 90? This is Christine Park. Seems like no one's staffing the station." She waited for a response. Nothing. She tried her cell phone to call the station directly. No signal, which was odd because she'd had full service on the highway minutes ago. After 10 minutes, Christine decided to walk to the office and notify the inspectors that she'd been waiting. She climbed out of her cab and approached the building, noting how quiet everything was. The highway was visible in the distance, traffic flowing normally, but no sound reached the way station. No engine noise, no wind, nothing. The office door was unlocked. Inside, Christine found a typical inspection station setup. Desks with computers, filing cabinets, notice boards with regulations and procedure charts. But no people. The computers were on, screens displaying way station software showing her truck on lane 2, weight calculated at 42,000 pounds, everything appearing normal. But no one was there to review it, to give clearance, to wave her through. "Hello?" Christine called. "Anyone here? Dot inspection staff?" Her voice echoed oddly, as if the building's acoustics were wrong. She walked through the office, checking rooms, finding break areas with fresh coffee and pots, half-eaten sandwiches on tables, computers logged in and active. Everything indicated the staff had been present moments ago but had vanished suddenly, leaving their work mid-task. Christine returned to her truck, confused and increasingly uneasy. She couldn't just leave. Driving past a way station without clearance was illegal, would result in fines or worse. But she couldn't wait indefinitely for staff who might never appear. She tried her CB again. "This is Christine Park at Iowa Way Station. Major problem here. Station appears abandoned. requesting guidance from any DOT personnel or truckers who know the area. This time, a response came through. "Christine, this is Nighthawk. I'm about 50 miles west of you on 90. Did you say the way station is abandoned?" Relief flooded through her. "Yes, I've been waiting over 20 minutes. The scales show my weight, but no one's giving clearance. The office is empty, but looks like staff just left. It's really strange." "Christine, get out of there. Leave now. Don't wait for clearance." "I can't just leave. That's a violation." "Listen to me carefully. That way station you're at, it doesn't exist. I drove through that section 3 hours ago. There's no way station there anymore. It was closed and demolished 2 years ago. You need to leave immediately." Christine's skin went cold. She looked around at the way station. Solid, real, perfectly functional. "Nighthawk, I'm sitting in it right now. It's definitely here. Lane 2, scales working, building full of equipment." "Christine, I've driven this route 100 times. There used to be a way station there, but it was shut down in 2021 and torn down. You're at a facility that doesn't exist anymore. Get back on the highway, now." Christine ran to her truck, climbed in, released the brakes. But when she tried to drive forward, the truck wouldn't move. The wheels turned, the engine responded, but the vehicle stayed locked in position on the scales as if held by invisible restraints. She shifted into reverse. Same result. The truck was trapped. The digital display above her changed. "Exit vehicle for inspection." Christine stared at it, heart pounding. She'd never seen that message before. Standard way stations didn't require drivers to exit vehicles. Detailed inspections happened after clearance, in separate parking areas. This was wrong. The office door opened and figures emerged. 3 men in DOT uniforms walking toward her truck. Relief washed over Christine. Finally, staff had appeared. But as they approached, she noticed something off about their movements. They walked in perfect synchronization, their steps matching exactly as if choreographed. And their faces as they came closer looked strange, features slightly wrong, proportions not quite human. The young lead figure tapped on her window. Christine hesitated, then cracked the window open. "Finally, someone's here. I've been waiting over 20 minutes for clearance. My weight's legal, everything's in order. Can I proceed?" The figure's mouth moved, but the voice came from the CB radio instead of from his lips. "Exit vehicle for inspection. This is mandatory. Exit now." "I'd like to call my dispatcher first. Can I use your phone? My cell's not getting signal." The 3 figures surrounded her truck, their blank faces turned toward her window. The voice came through the CB again. "Exit vehicle for inspection. This is mandatory. Exit now." Christine made a decision. Something was deeply wrong with this situation. Whether the way station was real or not, whether these were actual DOT inspectors or something else, she needed to escape. She revved the engine hard, popped the clutch, and felt the truck lurch forward. Whatever had been holding her released suddenly, and she rocketed off the scale, accelerating toward the exit ramp that led back to the highway. In her mirrors, she saw the 3 figures running after her. But their running was wrong, too fast, covering ground at impossible speed. They were gaining on her despite her truck moving 30 miles per hour. Christine pushed harder, the exit ramp curving ahead. She took it too fast, felt the trailer swing wide, fought to control the truck as she merged back onto Interstate 90. The figures stopped at the ramp's edge, standing motionless as Christine accelerated into traffic. She didn't stop, didn't slow down until she'd covered 50 miles and reached the next town. There, she pulled into a truck stop and checked her truck thoroughly. No damage, no inspection notices, no record of her stop at the way station. Her electronic logging device showed her driving continuously along Interstate 90 with no stop indicated. Christine filed a report with DOT describing her experience. The response confused her. There was no way station at the location she specified. It had been closed in 2021 and the building demolished. The land where it had stood was now empty, returned to grass. Christine insisted she'd been there, had photographs on her phone to prove it. But when she checked, her phone showed no photos from that time period, no evidence of the way station. She drove back to the location a week later during daylight, determined to document that the way station existed. But when she reached the spot, she found only an abandoned lot, cracked pavement barely visible through weeds, no building, no scales, no equipment. The exit ramp was still there, unused and deteriorating, a road to nowhere. Christine eventually accepted that she'd experienced something impossible. She'd stopped at a way station that no longer existed, or existed only temporarily, or existed in some adjacent reality. The theories varied. Temporal echo, dimensional overlay, manifestation of a demolished structure's residual presence. But the experience was undeniably real to her. She'd been there, had walked through that building, had seen those figures. Other truckers reported similar encounters. Way stations that appeared where none should be, staffed by figures that looked almost human. Places that trapped vehicles until drivers either complied with impossible demands or fought free. Some drivers who stopped were never seen again, their trucks eventually found abandoned on highway shoulders with no sign of the drivers. Logbooks showing their last entries described pulling into way stations that didn't exist. Christine never stopped at that location again, even though the exit ramp remained. She'd drive past, sometimes seeing the ramp empty, sometimes seeing it leading to a functioning way station, the blue lights flashing. Open, all trucks must stop. But she'd never stop, would rather risk fines than return to that place outside time, where DOT inspectors who weren't human waited on scales that measured more than weight, where buildings that had been demolished still stood in some pocket of frozen past, where trucks could become trapped and drivers disappeared into whatever dimension the impossible way station truly occupied. Collected like specimens, never given clearance to leave, forever waiting for signals that would never come. Forever at the mercy of inspectors who wanted something more than logbook compliance, who measured drivers on scales that registered properties beyond physical mass, who were always hiring, always staffing, always waiting at way stations that existed in the margins between real and unreal, between present and past, between Iowa and nowhere. And Christine would never let herself be weighed by them again, would never exit her vehicle at their command, would never learn what they truly wanted from the truckers they trapped, because some inspections were too thorough, some regulations too strict, some way stations too hungry for drivers who followed the rules and pulled off when the light said stop. Story 5. The Load That Moved. Marcus Holloway had been hauling freight for 18 years, handling everything from furniture to industrial equipment. He wasn't particular about cargo. As long as it was legal and paid well, he'd haul it. In April of 2024, Marcus accepted a job that paid exceptionally well for what seemed like routine work. Picking up a sealed container from a warehouse in Baltimore and delivering it to an address in St. Louis. The shipping company was legitimate, the paperwork in order, and the premium rate suggested the cargo was valuable enough to warrant secure transport. Marcus arrived at the Baltimore warehouse at 8 a.m., presented his credentials, and waited while forklifts loaded a 20-foot container onto his flatbed trailer. The container was unmarked except for a serial number, made of heavy steel, and secured with industrial locks that required both physical keys and electronic codes to open. The warehouse supervisor handed Marcus detailed instructions. Maintain temperature above 50 degrees Fahrenheit. Avoid excessive vibration. Do not open the container under any circumstances. Deliver within 48 hours. What's in it? Marcus asked, curious about cargo that required such specific conditions. Medical equipment, the supervisor replied, but his expression suggested he didn't believe his own answer. Fragile and expensive. The company's paying for careful transport. Just follow the protocols and you'll be fine. Marcus secured the container, verified the load was balanced and properly chained, and departed Baltimore at 10 a.m. The first day passed uneventfully as he drove west through Pennsylvania and into Ohio. The container rode smoothly, no shifting or settling, no unusual sounds. Marcus stopped for fuel and food around 6 p.m., checked the container's exterior. Everything appeared secure. Around midnight, as he drove through rural Ohio on Interstate 70, Marcus heard something that made his skin crawl. It came from the container, a thump, distinct and deliberate, like something inside hitting the metal wall. He told himself it was cargo shifting, settling from road vibrations. But the thump came again, and then again with rhythmic regularity. Thump, pause, thump, pause, thump. Marcus pulled onto the shoulder, activated his hazards, and walked around the trailer. The container was locked and sealed exactly as it had been loaded. But as he stood beside it, he heard the sound clearly. Something inside was moving, and it wasn't cargo shifting randomly. The thumping had pattern, almost like knocking, like something deliberately trying to attract attention. He tried his cell phone, thinking he should call the shipping company and report the situation. But he had no signal on this rural stretch of highway. His CB radio was similarly silent, no chatter, no response when he tried calling out. Marcus returned to his cab, unsettled but unsure what to do. The instructions said, "Don't open the container," and he intended to follow that rule. If something was shifting inside, that wasn't his problem as long as the container remained secure. But the thumping continued as he resumed driving. Not constant, but periodic, sometimes minutes between sounds, sometimes in rapid sequences. And the pattern seemed intentional, like Morse code, like attempts at communication. Marcus tried to ignore it, turned up his music, focused on the highway. But the sounds penetrated everything, audible even over the engine noise and road rumble. Around 3 a.m., the thumping changed. It became scratching, like metal scraping against metal, like something inside was trying to cut or claw its way through the container walls. Marcus pulled over again, this time genuinely frightened. He examined the container with his flashlight, looking for any breaches or damage. The exterior was intact, but the scratching continued, intensifying, becoming frantic. Then he heard a voice, faint, muffled, coming from inside the container. "Let me out. Please, I can't breathe. Let me out." Marcus froze. Medical equipment didn't speak, and the voice sounded human, female, desperate. "Hello?" he called toward the container. "Is someone in there?" "Please," the voice responded. "I'm trapped. I need help. Open the container." Marcus's mind raced. If someone was actually inside, this wasn't a cargo haul. It was kidnapping or human trafficking. He should call police immediately, but his phone still had no signal. He tried the CB again. Dead air, not even static. He was isolated on a dark highway with a container that apparently held a prisoner. "Hold on," Marcus called. "I'm going to get help. We're going to get you out, but I need to find a signal. Contact authorities. Just hold on." "No, don't leave. They'll move me again. Please open it now. I don't have much time." Marcus approached the locks, examining them. They were beyond his ability to break, heavy industrial grade, requiring tools he didn't have. Even if he wanted to open the container, he couldn't without the keys and codes. "I can't open these locks," he explained. "They're electronic and keyed. I need the company to provide access codes." The voice inside became shrill, panicked. "Then drive to the police. Now, don't wait. I'm running out of air." Marcus ran to his cab, started the engine, and drove toward the next town, pushing his truck harder than he should. But as he drove, the voice from the container changed. It became multiple voices, men and women, overlapping and contradictory. One begged to be released, another warned him not to open it, a third screamed accusations, a fourth whispered threats. The cacophony was maddening, dozens of voices speaking simultaneously from inside a container that shouldn't have contained anything living. Marcus reached a town, pulled into a closed gas station, and tried the payphone, out of service. He tried his cell phone again, still no signal despite being in a populated area where service should exist. His CB radio was similarly dead. It was as if the container was blocking communications, creating a zone of isolation around the truck. He made a desperate decision. He'd drive directly to the nearest police station, lead them to the truck, let them deal with the container. But when he tried to navigate to the police station using his GPS, the system malfunctioned, showing him driving in circles, unable to lock onto any destination. The voices from the container grew louder, more insistent, more contradictory. Some claimed to be victims, others sounded predatory, threatening. And beneath all the voices, Marcus heard something else, a low-frequency hum that vibrated through the truck's frame, a sound that made his teeth ache and his vision blur. He pulled over, unable to continue. His head was pounding, his thoughts becoming confused. The voices were inside his mind now, not just coming from the container, but somehow transmitted directly into his consciousness. They showed him images, flashes of faces, scenes of violence, memories that weren't his own. The container wasn't just carrying something physical. It was carrying information, consciousness, something that existed beyond normal matter. Marcus remembered the instructions. Maintain temperature above 50 degrees. His trailer had temperature monitoring. He checked it and found the temperature inside the container was dropping, now at 45 degrees despite external temperature being much warmer. As the temperature fell, the voices intensified, the hum grew louder, the pressure in his head increased. He made a final decision. If lowering temperature increased whatever was happening, maybe raising it would have the opposite effect. He drove to an open truck stop, pulled alongside a fuel island, and began filling his tank while his engine ran. Then he pulled forward, positioning the trailer near the building's heating exhaust, maximizing ambient temperature around the container. Over the next hour, as the container warmed, the voices faded. The scratching stopped. The hum decreased to barely perceptible levels. Marcus monitored the temperature gauge, 58 degrees, 62, 65. At 70 degrees, everything went silent. Whatever had been active inside the container had gone dormant, suppressed by warmth. Marcus continued to St. Louis, keeping the container warm, avoiding cold areas. He delivered it to the specified address, an unmarked warehouse on the city's outskirts. Workers unloaded the container without comment, and Marcus was paid electronically, the funds appearing in his account instantly. He never learned what he'd hauled. The shipping company, when he tried to contact them later, had no record of the job. The Baltimore warehouse denied ever employing him. The St. Louis facility was abandoned when he returned to investigate, the building empty and showing signs of years of disuse. Marcus quit long-haul trucking and now works local routes, never hauling sealed containers, never accepting jobs with premium pay for mysterious cargo. But he's researched similar incidents and found a pattern. Truckers hauling sealed containers that exhibit impossible properties. Cargo that moves or speaks or influences drivers' minds. Loads delivered to facilities that subsequently vanish from records. He believes some companies use truckers as unwitting transporters of things that shouldn't be moved through normal channels. Perhaps experimental technology, perhaps something worse. The containers are designed to contain these things, to keep them dormant through specific conditions like temperature or electromagnetic shielding. But sometimes containment fails partially, and drivers experience what Marcus experienced, cargo that is aware, that communicates, that tries to manipulate its transporters into releasing it or into specific actions that serve purposes drivers can't understand. Marcus Holloway still drives, but he's careful now, scrutinizes every job, refuses anything that seems off. He knows what roads can carry, not just physical goods, but consciousnesses, entities, things that exist in forms that defy conventional categories. And he knows that truckers are the unwitting couriers of the impossible, hauling loads that move and speak in hunger, contained in steel boxes that sometimes fail, that sometimes leak their contents not physically but psychically, and that sometimes deliver their cargo to places that exist only temporarily. Facilities that appear for pickups and deliveries and then vanish back into whatever dimension they truly occupy, leaving drivers like Marcus with memories of voices in containers, of sounds that shouldn't exist, of cargo that was aware and wanted something from them, wanted freedom or wanted to infect new minds or wanted to be delivered to destinations that exist outside normal geography. And all the trucker can do is maintain the temperature, follow the protocols, resist the voices, complete the delivery, take the money, and try to forget what they carried through the night. What whispered to them from sealed containers, what scratched at metal walls trying to escape or trying to be heard or trying to do something worse, something Marcus barely avoided by keeping the container warm, by not opening the locks, by delivering on time to a warehouse that existed just long enough to receive its cargo before vanishing like smoke, leaving Marcus standing in an empty lot, wondering if any of it was real or if the voices had already infected his mind, if what he remembered was truth or fiction implanted by whatever consciousness he'd hauled across half the country in a container that was labeled medical equipment, but contained something that had nothing to do with medicine and everything to do with control, manipulation, and the slow spreading of influence that used truck drivers as vectors, carriers spreading something invisible and insidious across America's highways, one delivery at a time. Story 6. The Fog on Route 12. David Chen had been a trucker for 16 years, specializing in overnight runs between Seattle and Portland along Interstate 5 and various alternate routes. He knew the Pacific Northwest roads intimately, could navigate them in any weather, and had driven through every variation of rain, wind, and fog the region could produce. In October of 2023, David was returning to Seattle from a Portland delivery, choosing Route 12 through southwestern Washington, a scenic two-lane highway through forests and small towns that he preferred over the interstate when traffic was light. He departed Portland at 8 p.m., planning to reach Seattle by midnight. The weather forecast mentioned possible fog in low-lying areas, nothing unusual for October. The first hour passed uneventfully as Route 12 wound through darkness, his headlights illuminating trees and curves. Around 9:30, David entered a stretch of road that descended into a river valley, and fog appeared, thick, white, reducing visibility to perhaps 50 feet. David slowed to 40 miles per hour, using his fog lights, maintaining safe following distance from the occasional car ahead. But the fog grew denser, becoming opaque, visibility dropping to 20 feet, then 10. David reduced speed to 20 miles per hour, barely able to see the road's edge markers. Other vehicles had pulled over, hazards flashing, drivers waiting for conditions to improve. David considered stopping as well, but the fog was so thick he couldn't see a safe place to pull off. He continued at crawl speed, following the white line at the road's edge, trusting his memory of this route to navigate curves. The fog had a strange quality. It seemed to glow from within, illuminated by some sourceless light that made it hard to judge distance or depth. Then David realized he'd lost track of how long he'd been in the fog. Glancing at his clock, he saw it was 10:15. He'd been driving through this fog for 45 minutes, covering perhaps 15 miles. But Route 12's foggy section should have been only 5 or 6 miles long. Had he somehow gotten turned around? Was he traveling in circles? His GPS wasn't helping. The screen showed his position moving along Route 12 normally, but the road on the GPS didn't match what he was experiencing. The GPS showed curves where the road was straight, showed straight sections where he was navigating tight curves. Either the GPS was completely wrong or the road itself had changed. David tried his CB radio. "Any drivers on Route 12? This is David Chen. I'm stuck in heavy fog, visibility near zero. Looking for road condition updates, Static answered. He tried his cell phone. No signal, though he should have had coverage in this area. The fog pressed against his windshield like something solid. David had the disturbing sensation that he was driving through a substance rather than through air, that his truck was pushing through resistance, that the fog was actively impeding his progress. His speedometer showed 20 miles per hour, but his progress felt slower, as if the fog was holding him back. Then he saw lights ahead, red taillights. Another vehicle stopped or moving very slowly. Relief flooded through David. At least he wasn't alone. He followed the lights carefully, maintaining distance, grateful for any reference point in the featureless white void. But after several minutes, he noticed something wrong. The vehicle ahead was maintaining exactly the same distance, no matter how he adjusted his speed. When he slowed, it slowed. When he accelerated slightly, it accelerated to match, and its lights looked odd, too red, too bright, pulsing with a rhythm that hurt his eyes. David honked his horn, the sound disappearing into fog without echo. The lights ahead didn't respond, just continued their steady pace, leading him deeper into the white void. David's unease grew. Those lights didn't behave like a normal vehicle. He decided to stop following them, to pull over and wait for conditions to improve or for dawn to burn off the fog. But when he touched his brakes, they didn't respond immediately. The truck continued forward, closing distance with the red lights. David pumped the brakes harder. They engaged, but sluggishly, as if the fog was interfering with mechanical systems. He managed to slow, let the red lights pull ahead and vanish into fog. He brought his truck to a complete stop, setting the air brake, engine idling. Silence surrounded him. The fog pressed against windows from all sides, glowing with that strange, sourceless illumination. David checked his clock. 10:45. He'd been in fog for over an hour, which made no sense for this section of highway. He should have emerged long ago. Movement caught his eye in the passenger side mirror. A figure was walking past his truck, visible as a dark silhouette against the glowing fog. David rolled down his window. "Hey, you okay? Do you need help?" The figure stopped, turned toward him. It was a person, or shaped like one. But its proportions seemed wrong, limbs too long, head too large. It moved closer to David's truck, and as it approached, David saw that it wasn't quite solid. The fog showed through it slightly, as if the figure was made from the same substance. A coherent shape formed from the white void. The figure raised a hand. Too many fingers, joints bending in wrong directions, and pointed ahead, indicating David should continue driving. Then it walked past, disappearing into fog behind the truck. David's heart hammered. He started to roll up his window, but saw more figures walking past, dozens of them, all with that same wrong-proportioned appearance, all walking in the same direction David had been driving, all pointing forward when they noticed him, encouraging him to continue. David sat frozen, unable to decide whether to drive forward or stay put or try to turn around. The figures kept passing, an endless procession emerging from fog behind him and disappearing into fog ahead. They weren't threatening exactly, but their presence was deeply unnatural, and their silent insistence that he continue in the direction they traveled filled him with dread. He decided to drive backward, to reverse along the highway to escape the way he'd come. He shifted into reverse, craning his neck to see through rear windows, and began backing slowly. But the fog grew even denser behind him, thickening into something nearly solid. His truck moved backward perhaps 20 feet before stopping entirely, unable to push through the increased resistance. The figures were still passing, and now they were looking at him with what felt like disapproval. One approached his driver's side door, and David saw its face, or the approximation of a face, features suggested rather than defined, eyes that were darker patches in the fog substance. It tapped on his window, and despite the fog-like nature of its hand, the tapping was solid, producing real sound. David, terrified but unable to see an alternative, shifted back into drive and accelerated gently. The fog ahead thinned slightly, just enough for him to move forward. The figures seemed satisfied, resuming their forward march. David followed, not because he chose to, but because all other options had been eliminated. The procession continued for what felt like hours but might have been minutes. Time had become as unreliable as space. David followed the walking figures, and they led him along Route 12 through the impossible fog, through sections that seemed to curve wrong, that seemed to pass through geography that didn't match his memory or his GPS. Eventually, dawn came, or something like dawn, a gradual graying of the fog, a hint of light from above. The fog began to thin, visibility increasing to 100 feet, then 200. The walking figures faded as the fog diminished, becoming less distinct, eventually dissolving entirely. And suddenly David was driving on normal Route 12 in thin morning mist, with recognizable landmarks visible around him. He pulled over immediately, hands shaking too badly to continue. He checked his clock, 6:15 a.m. He'd been in the fog for 8 hours, though it felt like both more and less than that. He checked his GPS. It showed him 70 miles north of where he'd entered the fog, which would put him near Olympia, far past where he should have emerged onto Interstate 5. David resumed driving in daylight, reaching Seattle by 8 a.m. He reported his experience to other truckers at his terminal, expecting disbelief or mockery. Instead, several drivers shared similar stories. Route 12 had a reputation among local truckers. Certain sections experienced fog that wasn't normal fog, that led drivers astray, that sometimes delivered them to locations far from where they should have emerged, and that sometimes didn't release them at all. One older driver named Frank told David about a friend who'd entered Route 12 fog in 1998 and never emerged. His truck was found 3 days later, parked on the shoulder near Olympia, empty, driver never located. Others told variations of the same story. Drivers lost in fog, found miles from where they should have been, sometimes missing time, sometimes missing memories of the journey. David never drove Route 12 again, taking longer routes to avoid that highway. But the experience changed him. He became aware that roads weren't always fixed, that geography could become fluid under certain conditions, that fog could be more than water vapor. It could be a medium, a substance that blurred boundaries between locations, that created paths through impossible spaces. He researched fog phenomena and found accounts from around the world of people entering fog and emerging in different places or different times. The fog served as transition, portal, threshold between normal reality and something else. And the figures in the fog, residents, guardians, guides, entities that existed within or were made from the fog itself, shepherding travelers through the transition, ensuring they followed the correct paths through spaces that had no fixed geography. David wonders where Route 12's fog truly leads, what destination the walking figures were guiding him toward. He'd escaped by emerging when dawn came, when natural light burned away the fog and forced reality to reassert itself. But what about drivers who remained in the fog longer, who followed the figures through complete journeys? Did they emerge somewhere else in different times or different versions of Washington? Or did they become part of the fog themselves, joining the procession of wrong-proportioned figures walking endlessly through white void, guiding new drivers who made the mistake of entering Route 12 during fog conditions, who thought they were just driving through normal weather but instead entered something older and stranger? A fog that remembered when the landscape was different, when roads didn't exist but paths did, when the boundary between here and there was thin and permeable, and crossing it required only that you continue driving forward, following the lights ahead, trusting the figures that walked beside your vehicle, accepting that Route 12 wasn't always Route 12 but sometimes became something else entirely. A highway through nowhere. A road through fog that had substance and will, and David had driven it for 8 hours in a night that felt both endless and instantaneous. Guided by beings made from mist, delivered to a location 70 miles from where physics said he should have been, and he'd been lucky to emerge at all. Lucky that dawn came. Lucky that the fog released him instead of keeping him forever, adding him to the procession of walkers who pointed forward into white void, silent guides for the next lost trucker who entered the fog on Route 12 and discovered too late that some highways don't follow maps, don't observe geography, don't care about destinations, but simply exist as passages through reality's thin places, and once you enter, the only way out is to reach the end, wherever and whenever that might be. Story 7. The Mirror Truck. Angela Rodriguez had driven for 14 years, running coast-to-coast hauls in a distinctive custom-painted Peterbilt 389 with purple and silver flames on the trailer. She was proud of her truck, kept it immaculately maintained, and was always easy to spot at truck stops. In June of 2023, Angela was hauling consumer electronics from Los Angeles to Atlanta, taking her usual route along Interstate 40 through New Mexico, Texas, and into the South. Around 2 a.m. in western Texas, in the empty stretch between Amarillo and the Oklahoma border, Angela noticed headlights in her mirrors. Another truck following about a quarter-mile behind, maintaining steady distance. This wasn't unusual. Truckers often traveled in informal convoys on lonely highways, the presence of other vehicles providing psychological comfort in the vast darkness. But after 30 minutes, Angela noticed something odd about the following truck. Even at this distance, it looked familiar. The proportions, the shape, even what she could see of its paint scheme in her mirror's reflection of her own taillights. It all looked remarkably similar to her Peterbilt. Probably just coincidence. Another custom-painted truck. Nothing strange about that. Except the truck maintained exactly the same distance regardless of her speed. When Angela accelerated to 70 miles per hour, the truck behind matched her speed precisely, remaining exactly a quarter-mile back. When she slowed to 60, the same distance held. When she changed lanes, the truck behind changed lanes identically. The synchronization was too perfect to be coincidental. Angela tried her CB radio. "Driver behind me on 40 eastbound near mile marker 35, you copying?" She waited. No response. She tried again on different channels, got nothing. The truck continued following. Perfect shadow, exact distance, precise movements. Angela decided to stop to let the truck pass and see who was driving. She signaled and pulled onto the shoulder, bringing her Peterbilt to a stop. In her mirrors, she watched the following truck, and it also pulled onto the shoulder, stopping exactly a quarter-mile behind her. Its position relative to hers unchanged. This was deliberate. Someone was following her, matching her movements. Angela felt uneasy, but also annoyed. She climbed out of her cab and stood beside her truck, looking back along the shoulder toward the other vehicle. Its headlights were on, but she couldn't see details at this distance in the darkness. She waved her arms, signaling for the driver to approach. The truck didn't move. Angela decided to walk back, to confront whoever was following her. She began walking along the shoulder, flashlight in hand. But as she walked, the following truck began backing up, maintaining the same distance. Angela stopped walking. The truck stopped backing up. She took another step forward. The truck took another movement backward, staying exactly as far from her as before. "What the hell?" Angela muttered. She returned to her truck, climbed in, and accelerated back onto the highway, fed up with whatever game this was. She pushed her truck to 75 miles per hour, faster than she normally drove, trying to create distance. But checking her mirrors, the following truck had also accelerated, maintaining that exact quarter-mile gap. Angela drove for another hour, and the truck never wavered in its pursuit. At 3:30 a.m., she took an exit for a truck stop, needing fuel and desperate to get away from her shadow. She pulled up to a fuel island, killed her engine, and watched her mirrors carefully. The other truck took the same exit, entered the truck stop parking lot, but stopped at the entrance, not approaching the fuel islands. Angela fueled up, her eyes constantly checking the parked truck. From this closer distance, she could see it more clearly under the truck stop lights, and her blood went cold. It wasn't just similar to her truck, it was identical. Same model, Peterbilt 389, same custom purple and silver flame paint, same positioning of details. But that was impossible. Angela's paint job was unique, custom designed by a specialty shop. There couldn't be an identical truck. She walked toward the parked truck, determined to see who was driving this duplicate. But as she approached, the truck's engine started and it began moving, not forward or backward, but sideways, sliding across the parking lot without its wheels turning, maintaining the same orientation while changing position. The movement was impossible, violating basic physics. Angela stopped walking, too shocked to continue. The truck slid to the parking lot's far edge, then simply faded from view, becoming translucent and vanishing. Angela stood in the empty truck stop parking lot, staring at the space where the impossible truck had been. Other drivers walked past, none of them reacting to what she'd witnessed, as if they hadn't seen the truck at all. Angela returned to her Peterbilt, hands shaking, and sat in the cab trying to process what had happened. She continued her journey to Atlanta, but the mirror truck reappeared periodically. Sometimes it followed behind, maintaining that quarter-mile distance. Sometimes it appeared ahead of her, staying exactly a quarter mile in front, matching her speed perfectly. And sometimes, most disturbing, she'd see it passing her going the opposite direction on the interstate, and as they passed, she'd glimpse the driver through the windows. Herself. Same jacket, same hair, same everything, a duplicate Angela driving a duplicate truck. At truck stops, other drivers began commenting. "Hey Angela, I saw your truck an hour ago heading west. How'd you get turned around so fast?" Or, "Somebody's copying your paint job. Saw a truck just like yours at the last stop, but it couldn't have been you because the timing's all wrong." Angela researched her phenomenon and found accounts of similar experiences, drivers reporting seeing duplicate versions of their own vehicles, sometimes following, sometimes leading, sometimes passing in opposite directions. The duplicates were always perfect copies, same model, same paint, same damage or customization, and they always maintained specific spatial relationships, never getting too close, never falling too far behind, existing in a fixed relative position as if tethered by invisible elastic. One theory suggested the duplicates were echoes, versions of the trucks existing in parallel timelines that sometimes became visible when conditions aligned correctly. Certain highways at certain times creating overlap zones where different timelines touched. Another theory proposed the duplicates were temporal reflections, trucks seeing their own future or past positions through distortions in space-time created by the long straight highways and constant motion. Angela preferred a simpler explanation that she found in old trucker folklore. Some roads created shadows, duplicates of vehicles that traveled them frequently. The shadows existed as recordings, patterns impressed into the highway's structure by repeated journeys. Most of the time, the shadows were invisible, but occasionally they became perceptible. Ghostly copies of real trucks, following the same routes, making the same movements. Eternal repetitions of journeys already completed or yet to be completed. Angela's mirror truck appeared most frequently on Interstate 40 between Texas and Tennessee, the section she traveled most often. She began to think of it as a recording of her own countless trips, A ghost of her routine burned into the highway by repetition. And the duplicate Angela she glimpsed driving, perhaps that was a recording too, or perhaps it was the future Angela or past Angela, all the versions of herself that had driven this route overlapping in a moment of temporal transparency. The phenomenon has continued. Angela still sees her mirror truck, still watches it follow or lead or pass her, still feels unsettled by the perfect duplicate that exists just far enough away to be visible but not close enough to be confronted. Other truckers have started reporting seeing two of Angela's distinctive trucks, sometimes asking her if she sold her old one or if someone's copying her paint scheme. She hasn't sold her truck, and no one's copying her design. There are simply two Angela Rodriguez Peterbilts on Interstate 40 now. One real, one reflection, one solid, one shadow. One driven by the Angela who exists in the present moment, one driven by the Angela who exists in every moment simultaneously. The recorded pattern of all her journeys compressed into a single phantom vehicle that follows the same routes, makes the same stops, drives the same endless miles but never consumes fuel, never needs rest, never stops being a perfect mirror of the original. And Angela wonders sometimes which truck is real and which is the shadow. Wonders if she's the solid version or if she's the recording, the ghost following the path of journey she's already made or will make, unable to deviate because ghosts can only repeat, can only follow the patterns that created them, and maybe every trucker who drives the same route enough times creates these shadows, these mirror trucks that haunt highways. These recordings of journeys impressed into pavement and time, and maybe the roads are full of them, invisible most of the time, but always there, always driving, always maintaining those perfect distances from their originals, always visible in mirrors if you look carefully enough, always exactly where they're supposed to be. Forever traveling routes they'll never complete because completion would mean the recording ends. And the recording never ends, it just repeats. Eternal loop of the same journeys, the same miles, the same destinations that are reached and then immediately become starting points again. And Angela Rodriguez drives Interstate 40 knowing her mirror truck drives it too. Knowing that she sees it sometimes but wondering how often it sees her. Wondering which of them is more real. Which will fade first. Which will still be driving these highways long after the original has stopped. Because shadows sometimes outlast the objects that cast them. Because recordings sometimes survive longer than the events they recorded. Because Interstate 40 remembers every truck that's traveled its length. And some of those trucks never left, never stopped, never ended their journeys but became permanent features of the highway. Ghost trucks driving forever, visible only as reflections. Maintaining perfect distances from realities they mirror, and Angela's mirror truck is just one of thousands, and someday she'll see the others. Someday conditions will align and she'll look around and see the highways full of phantom vehicles. All the trucks that have become recordings, all the shadow convoys maintaining formation, all the ghost drivers who exist as patterns rather than people. And she'll understand finally that highways collect us, that roads remember us, that every journey leaves an imprint. And some imprints become so deep they achieve their own existence. Separate from the original eternal duplicates that will haunt Interstate 40 long after the real trucks have rusted away. Long after real truckers have retired or died. Long after the highways themselves are abandoned and reclaimed by desert, because recordings don't care about time, don't care about decay, don't care about ending. They just continue, perfect and unchanging. Mirrors that reflect journeys that were, that are, that always will be, because once you've driven a road enough times, you never really leave it. Part of you stays there forever, driving, following, leading, passing yourself in the darkness. Quarter-mile shadows that never close distance and never fall behind. Perfect synchronized phantoms sharing highways with the living. And Angela Rodriguez has become one of them. Has created her mirror. has left her recording, and now she drives knowing her shadow drives too, and wondering which of them is more alive, which more real, which will ultimately prove to be the original, and which the reflection in the glass. Story 8. The Last Exit. Thomas Wright had been a trucker for 22 years, proud of his safety record, his reliability, and his extensive knowledge of America's highway system. In September of 2024, Thomas was hauling furniture from Phoenix to Denver, taking Interstate 25 north through New Mexico and into Colorado. It was a route he'd driven dozens of times, straightforward and familiar with no expected complications. He departed Phoenix at 4 p.m., planning to drive through the evening and overnight, arriving in Denver by morning. The first hours passed normally as he crossed into New Mexico, the landscape transitioning from desert to high plains. Around 11 p.m., Thomas was in central New Mexico, approaching the section of Interstate 25 that ran through empty territory between Las Cruces and Albuquerque. His GPS indicated an upcoming exit for a town called Silverton, which Thomas didn't recognize. He'd driven this route many times and didn't remember a town by that name in this location. He dismissed it as a GPS error, probably showing an old exit or misidentifying a service area. But as he approached, he saw the exit sign clearly in his headlights. Silverton, next exit, gas food lodging. Thomas was running low on fuel, not critically, but enough that a fuel stop would be wise. If Silverton actually existed and had services, he might as well stop. He took the exit, following the ramp off the interstate. The exit curved away from the highway, descending into darkness. No lights were visible ahead, no indication of a town, just empty desert under starlight. Thomas almost turned back, but the road continued smoothly, and his GPS now showed Silverton clearly, supposedly 3 miles from the interstate. He continued, trusting that a town would appear, that this was just a particularly dark and isolated exit approach. After 2 miles, he saw lights ahead, a promising sign. The lights resolved into a small town, maybe a dozen buildings arranged along a main street, all illuminated by streetlights that cast warm yellow glows. Thomas entered Silverton and immediately felt something was off. The town looked old-fashioned. Buildings styled like something from the 1950s, cars parked along the street that matched that era. The gas station had vintage pumps, the diner had a neon sign in cursive script, the motel had a retro-looking vacancy sign. It was like a perfectly preserved time capsule, or a movie set dressed to represent mid-20th century America. But Thomas needed fuel, and the gas station was open, lights on in the attendant booth. He pulled up to the pumps and waited for someone to emerge. After a minute, a young man in coveralls approached. "Evening, driver. Fill up?" "Yeah, diesel, please. And do you have a restroom I can use?" The attendant nodded, gesturing toward the station building. "Inside, around back. Take your time." Thomas climbed out and entered the building. Inside, it matched the exterior's vintage aesthetic. Old-fashioned product displays, glass bottles of soda, snack packaging designed like it was from decades ago. Even the prices were wrong, absurdly low, showing figures from a different economic era. The restroom was clean but antiquated, fixtures that hadn't been manufactured in 50 years. When Thomas returned, the attendant had finished fueling his truck. "That'll be $42, the young man said. Thomas handed him 3 $20 bills, modern currency. The attendant looked at them with confusion. "What's this? These bills aren't right. The design's all wrong." Thomas looked at the 20s, standard modern U.S. currency, issued within the last decade. "These are regular $20 bills. What do you mean they're not right?" The attendant examined them more carefully, then shrugged. "Must be some new design I haven't seen. We don't get many travelers through here. I'll take them, but I can't make change. We don't have bills like these in the register." "Keep the change," Thomas said, eager to leave. Something about Silverton was deeply wrong. He climbed back into his truck, started the engine, and drove back toward the exit. But after traveling for 5 minutes, he found himself entering Silverton again from the other direction, the gas station appearing ahead, the same buildings in the same arrangement. Confused, Thomas stopped and checked his GPS. It showed him on the road leading back to Interstate 25, but clearly he'd driven in a circle somehow. He turned around, carefully noting landmarks, and drove back the way he'd come. But again, after several minutes, he found himself entering Silverton from yet another direction, the town appearing as if it was the only destination, the only place all roads led. Thomas tried different routes, different turns, attempting to navigate out of Silverton by varying his approach. But every road, every direction, every choice led him back to the same main street, the same gas station, the same collection of buildings. The town was inescapable, a loop that returned him to its center no matter how he tried to leave. He pulled over and tried his cell phone. No signal. He tried the CB radio, only static. His GPS was now malfunctioning, showing him simultaneously in multiple locations, the display flickering between Silverton and nowhere, coordinates that made no sense. Thomas sat in his truck on Silverton's main street, trying to calm his rising panic. The young attendant approached his window. "Something wrong? I can't find my way out. Every road brings me back here." The attendant nodded sympathetically. "Yeah, that happens sometimes. Silverton's tricky to leave once you've arrived. But don't worry, we have accommodations. The motel's got rooms, the diner's open 24 hours. You can stay until you figure out the roads." "I don't want to stay. I need to get back to the interstate. I have a delivery schedule." "Everyone's got somewhere to be," the attendant said. "But Silverton doesn't let go easily. You'll figure it out eventually. Some folks take a day, some take longer. There's one driver who's been here 3 weeks, still trying to find the way out." Thomas felt ice in his chest. 3 weeks? What do you mean 3 weeks? Time works different here. You'll notice that too if you stay long enough. Days feel like hours, hours feel like days. It's confusing at first, but you adjust. Thomas drove away from the attendant, determined to escape by force if necessary. He accelerated down Silverton's main street, pushing his truck to 50 miles per hour, racing toward the town's edge. But the edge never came. The main street simply looped, bringing him back to the gas station. The buildings repeating in sequence, the same storefronts passing his windows over and over, as if the town was a circle, as if Silverton had no outside, only an interior that folded back on itself. He tried driving off-road, leaving the pavement and heading across the desert. But his steering wheel locked, refusing to turn more than a few degrees, keeping him on the street. He tried reversing, driving backward, but the truck wouldn't move in reverse. The transmission somehow locked out. Every attempt to escape was blocked, as if the town itself was preventing his departure. Finally exhausted and defeated, Thomas parked near the motel. He'd wait until daylight, try again when he could see more clearly, when logic and geography might make more sense. He entered the motel office, where an elderly woman greeted him. "Room for the night?" "Yeah. How much?" $5? Thomas laughed bitterly at the absurd price, but paid with a $5 bill. The woman gave him a key to room 7 and directions down the exterior corridor. Thomas found the room, entered, and found it exactly as outdated as everything else in Silverton. Furniture from the 50s, black and white television, rotary phone on the nightstand. He tried the phone, lifting the receiver. A dial tone hummed. Thomas dialed his dispatcher's number, desperately hoping for connection. The phone rang and someone answered. "Silverton operator. How may I direct your call?" "I need to call out of town, long distance. I need to reach Denver." "I'm sorry, sir. Silverton doesn't have long-distance service. We can only connect to local numbers within town." Thomas hung up and tried his cell phone again. Still no signal. He turned on the television, finding only one channel that showed black and white. Programming from decades ago. He lay on the bed, telling himself he'd rest for a few hours, then try again at dawn. But dawn never came. Thomas waited in his room, watching the clock, and the time never advanced past 3:47 a.m. The minute hand stayed frozen, the hour hand unmoving. Outside the window, darkness persisted, unchanging, eternal night. Thomas opened the door and saw other guests in the motel parking lot, other truckers standing beside their vehicles, all looking confused and lost. He approached one, a middle-aged woman named Janet. "How long have you been here?" "I don't know anymore. I arrived at night and night never ended. I've slept 3 times, eaten 6 meals, but it's still dark. Still 3:47 a.m. every time I check a clock." Thomas talked to other trapped truckers, hearing variations of the same story. They'd all taken the Silverton exit, all entered the town, all found themselves unable to leave. Some had been there days, others weeks by their subjective experience, but time was unmeasurable, day never breaking, clocks never advancing past 3:47 a.m. One trucker, an old-timer named Frank, claimed he'd discovered the truth. Silverton's not a real town, it's a trap, a pocket of caught time. The town existed once, back in the 50s, but something happened. An accident, a nuclear test nearby, something that froze it in a single moment. Now it exists outside normal time, and it catches travelers who take the wrong exit. We're stuck in 3:47 a.m. on whatever date Silverton stopped existing, and we can't leave because we're caught in the same moment that caught the town. Thomas didn't know if Frank's theory was accurate, but it matched what he'd experienced. The town's vintage appearance, the dated prices, the impossibility of leaving, the frozen time, all suggested Silverton existed in a temporal bubble, a preserved moment that trapped anyone who entered. Thomas tried everything. He walked to the town's edge, finding that the desert beyond simply didn't exist. The darkness was absolute, solid, like walking into a wall. He tried following the road back toward the interstate, but the road looped back to town, an infinite circle. He tried waiting, hoping that eventually time would resume, that 3:47 a.m. would become 3:48 a.m. But hours passed, or felt like they passed, and nothing changed. The worst part was the residents, the attendant, the motel clerk, the diner staff. They all acted as if everything was normal, as if frozen time and inescapable geography were ordinary. They served meals, provided services, made conversation, all while trapped in the same eternal moment. Either they were unaware of their situation, or they'd been trapped so long they'd accepted it, becoming part of Silverton's timeless existence. Thomas doesn't know how long he's been in Silverton now. He slept many times, eaten countless meals at the diner where the menu never changes and the prices stay at 1955 levels. He's talked with other trapped truckers, sharing theories and strategies, but none have found escape. The town holds them in its perpetual night, in its frozen moment, and there's no indication that release is possible. His truck sits in the motel parking lot, fuel gauge still showing the same level it showed when he first arrived, as if even the fuel exists outside time's normal flow. His dispatcher must have filed him as missing. His delivery never completed, his truck never returned. But in Silverton, none of that matters. There's only the eternal now, the permanent 3:47 a.m., the town that exists as a snapshot of 1955 America, preserved forever in amber or darkness or whatever substance freezes moments and makes them eternal. Thomas has stopped trying to escape. Most of the long-term trapped truckers have reached that same conclusion. Escape is impossible. Acceptance is the only option. They've formed a community of sorts, the trapped drivers helping each other maintain sanity, sharing their stories, playing cards in the diner. existing as well as they can in a town that shouldn't exist, on an exit that shouldn't be taken, in a moment that should have passed 69 years ago but instead became permanent, became a trap, became home for truckers who made the wrong choice, who saw a promising sign for gas and food and lodging, who took the last exit, the exit that leads away from Interstate 25 and into somewhere else entirely, into the town called Silverton that exists at 3:47 a.m. forever, where the night never ends, where the prices are 1950s reasonable, where the attendant is always young and willing to fill your tank, where rooms cost $5 and television shows black and white programs where time doesn't pass because time has stopped and Thomas Wright checks into room 7 every night that isn't really night, pays his $5 that never runs out because his wallet refills while he's not looking, sleeps in a bed that's always freshly made and wakes to the same darkness, the same frozen moment, the same eternal 3:47 a.m. in the town he can never leave. The exit he can never undo, the choice he can never unmake because Silverton found him, claimed him, added him to its collection of trapped travelers, and now he exists outside the highway system, outside the delivery schedules, outside time itself. Permanent resident of the last exit, the exit that promises services but delivers eternity. The exit that every trucker fears but most never encounter. The exit that Thomas Wright took on a September night that never ended, that still hasn't ended, that will never end, because when you take the last exit, you've reached your final destination, whether you intended to or not.